Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Musician Guidance Podcast. My name is Mack, and I'm joined alongside a very special guest today. He's a Grammy-winning music producer, mixer, engineer, and veteran of over 9,000 recording and mixing sessions. He's also contributed to recordings totaling more than 80 million units sold or downloaded. Throughout his illustrious career, he has worked with and contributed on songs for music's biggest stars, including Alicia Keys, Jay-Z, Mariah Carey, and Michael Jackson. Without further ado, Tony Black, how are you doing today?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Appreciate you taking the time to jump on.
Not a problem at all. Looking forward to it. I always have fun with these kind of things.
Love to hear it. You got your coffee there?
Oh, yeah.
Right on. So yeah, it's a great honor to have you on, and I'm excited to learn from your vast experience, and I'm sure you have some great stories and advice to share too. But before we dive into that, I would like to give yourself an opportunity to share a little bit more about yourself, how you got involved in the music industry, and how that led to producing and mixing for music superstars.
Well, I started as a musician in my teens pretty early, not like an outlier age kind of thing, like 6 or 7. I was in my mid-teens. I started on the guitar and got into playing in small bands and then playing professionally in my late teens in Jersey clubs, and New York, Jersey, New York, and Connecticut type of live venues. And I did live performing for several years. And during that time, as I was getting into different bands and working with different musicians, started working on my own music, always had sort of an inclination to get involved with the gear and the gadgets and as did some of the other guys that I was hanging around with. So through all of that, like, I was really obsessed with it, really got into hanging out at a music store that I worked at after hours and trying every little piece of gear and going about trying to find the answer to how people get something to sound like a record. And, back then we didn't have internet, YouTube, and things like that. So it was a lot of trial and error and asking around and just experimenting, really. There wasn't a lot of info with regards to how records were really made. It was the big mystery of how you get into a room with all the knobs and sliders and I didn't even know what that stuff did to a certain extent until probably like my late teens, early 20s, as far as getting on that. And we just kept going from there. And as the band thing started to somewhat fizzle out or get crazy frustrating with bands breaking up and lead singers having breakdowns and all that, I was a guitar player. I really got further. Anytime that someone was doing like a recording session with any band friend that I knew, I would just kind of volunteer, like, yeah, I'll come along to the session and hang out and just. So I got really exposed to that lifestyle pretty early, in the sense that you could get exposed to it back then, because, like I said, there just wasn't that access that you could have now, where you could turn on YouTube and see like what it's like to be in a session.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to go physically, and I would go and just hang out and tune guitars or move a microphone around for the engineer. I didn't even understand really like what a producer and engineer was, any of that kind of stuff, until I started hanging around it a bit. And so that led me through the point where I was helping out a friend who was a well-known rock star in New Jersey. He was in this band Skid Row, and he had started setting up a home recording studio, and he got word that I knew that kind of stuff because I was always in the studio or always in my own home studio. So one day when we were out just like at a bar, he's like, hey, would you come by my place and check out how everything's set up? So like the next day I was there. Hey, move these speakers this way. You have one speaker on the wrong side. you need to switch this, switch that. And then he just out of the blue, and this really changed my career in every way. He said, "Oh, I'm going to the AES convention in New York with my friend Mike, who works at the Hit Factory. And we're going on Saturday or Sunday, one of those things." And he's like, "Do you want to go?" And I said, "Yeah." I didn't even know what it was. Ironically. So I don't remember how it went about, but like next thing I'm in the car with him and this guy Mike. We go to the AES convention, and at that time, I mean, it must have been like 1991 or something like that. It was enormous. It was all of the Javits Center in New York City, and thousands of people, big racket of noise everywhere, and music, recording consoles everywhere, microphones, all that stuff. Every gear company was there, and so we walked around with him and the other guy for the whole day. And when we got done on the ride home, I don't know, Mike decided I was okay, and he said, "Hey, by the way, like, do you want a job at the Hit Factory?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean that maybe,
Sounds pretty good.
I was like, maybe, yeah, I don't even know what that is." He's like, "Well, you'd be an assistant engineer for a little while, and then then eventually you learn enough to get to whereas you can get in the rooms or whatever." I was like, he didn't really tell me that in the beginning. You're literally a gopher. You're literally like on the street going to pick up tape from another studio. I didn't know what was going on. So like I just went to an interview Friday during the week. He had set it up. The owner's son, Troy, who was he was like the vice president, and he did all the hiring of assistants. And I showed up. I swear that I showed up, and I didn't have a resume or anything. And I sit down, and he's like, "So Mike?" And I was like, "Yeah, I know Mike." Like for about a day. But anyway, I said, "Yeah, yeah." He's like, "What have you been doing?" I said, "Well, I've been doing like demos and stuff, and I have my own little setup at home in New Jersey, and I work out of this other studio in New Jersey, just doing production and recording." And he's like, "So why are you here?" And I said, "I don't know. I really want to work on records that actually come out." I'll never forget telling him this. I was like, "I want to work on stuff that comes out, like that actually gets in the store and on the shelf, because
Right.
like all this stuff that I'm doing down in the suburbs with all these weird owner operator studio guys, they never come out. They never see the light of day. And I want to work on stuff that actually is a real record." And he's like, "Well, all right, you can start Monday. Just be at," they have two buildings. So they were like, "Be at the other building at like 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday." So I showed up, and my first walk through the hallways, this one technician was opening the studio up, and he let me in. He's like, "Oh, so you're here to start?" He's like, "You really want to work here?" It was like very New York, like the
Yeah.
guy, just like that whole rough edge to him. He's probably in his 40s. And he's like, "You really want to do this?" And I was like, "Yeah." Walk in, and the first thing I'm hearing is like, "Oh yeah, Paul Simon's coming in at 10 o'clock in this room. Joan Jett's down the hallway in that room. David Bowie's in another room." And like some R&B act was in one of the other rooms. I think they might have been called Groove Theory or something like that.
Okay.
And I was like, okay. And then there's a receptionist, there's cleaning crews, there's technicians in every room setting up all the tape decks. And I was just like, "Oh, this might be the coolest thing I've ever seen." I was meeting people that were going to be a big part of my future and the future as I even know it now. It was like, who knew? Like, Rob is the first one that told me at the Hit Factory, like, "Okay, you go to Broadway Bagel and buy, get petty cash and buy 25 muffins all mixed up because we got to put 4 in each room." Like all these kinds of things. And then we wound up not long after that being on the Michael Jackson session as engineers.
What was it like to work with them? Was it structured? Could everyone contribute, or?
Yeah, well, the Michael Jackson thing was like my first big, aside from just getting into the Hit Factory, my next big break was I got a call one night. I was down in New Jersey, like hanging out with friends, and the owner of the studio called me and said, can you be at the studio tomorrow at 10 in the morning? And I said, yeah. And she's like, hey, you're going to be on the Michael Jackson session. So it's like 2 o'clock. She called me. I'm down at my
Oh, wow.
friends. We're out, and I called her back like a half hour later. Like, did you just tell me I'm like working? Because I was a little maybe under the weather. So got my ass up there for the 10 o'clock thing. And this was this massive project of the greatest hits record, which is history, Michael Jackson history. Half of it is all new material and half of it is greatest hits.
Okay.
And so for the next 11 months, I worked with this big crew in 2 studios that were connected. And I was like low guy on the totem pole. I was like the last one in. There were already 2 main engineers, which was Bruce Swedien and Eddie Delana. And then there were 3 or 4 assistant engineers. It was this guy Brian, the guy Rob that I mentioned that went on to do the Christina Aguilera, and then another guy Andrew, who is now and was Andrew Sheps, who's like a real big known mixing engineer. At the time, he was like, like I said, like they were just like, we were just green, just doing nonstop stuff. Who knew that, like, okay, he's going to go on to work with Red Hot Chili Peppers and Rick Rubin, and I was going to go on to work with Alicia and all these other people. We had no idea. We were just surviving in the Michael Jackson thing. And the Michael Jackson thing was intense. These were all, as it turns out, and I've talked about this on some other things, including my YouTube channel. These were all like, we were all like A-level guys. So all sort of like could take over leading the room at any moment's notice. So there weren't really any assistants. It was like everybody was strong-willed, strong, big-headed, alpha, kind of whatever terminology you would want to use. I didn't really know that then, but looking back at it now, I could see like, oh, all right, like we had like a really intense crew that was, everybody had the mentality of like they could take over the room at any point. They weren't just like assistant type or like second down the tier type of players. They were serious players who were going on to like careers in this thing. And there's definitely a difference between the leaders of a room, and I'm just referring to like a recording room or a port project, as and then like team players. They could be we're team players, but like that doesn't last long. So, which is kind of like the explanation to that would be, you could only keep those amount of guys, those type of guys together for so long before it would just be like, poof, they're all going off to do their own thing. You'll never get them back in together.
Yeah, I know one of our mentors, Candace Sosa, she has wrote for BTS, and she was talking about how it's super important to know your place in the studio and know that you're there for a reason and to contribute.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a way of, first of all, as an engineer, if your role is strictly engineer, then you really have to play a role in that you're trying to help the artist and the producer get what they want. And if sometimes it's the same person, the artist is producing themselves. So like, you have to be, there's their person that they can count on to keep their flow going, keep their artistic vision going, not get in the way as far as being too technical. You got to be like looking out for them at all times, and just reading the room, which is agreed is like a huge thing. Like knowing your lane and staying in it is big, even if you are a strong personality. There are times where you have to pull it back.
Definitely. And I know now you're working more with up and coming artists. How does that differ from working with, the established artists, and what do you prefer about it?
Yeah, I mean, I mostly work with independent artists now. I mean, we could call them up and coming or whatever, but some of them are, they're putting stuff out and everything. So they're beyond the up and coming. They're like, they've released stuff. There's a I mean, how can I put this nicely? Or
you don't have to.
no, I mean there's a difference between and I don't envy the indie artist in a lot of ways, compared to what the major artists go, but they are very different. Anybody that thinks that like an independent artist or an indie artist and self-produced and all that kind of thing is similar to a major artist, major label artist, I think they're way off, because of the vetting process that has happened to become a major label artist. You've gone through a whole bunch of failing and rejection and things like that mold you differently than you never getting in and just doing this independent work. It's really hard to describe, but it's sort of a misnomer that like everything is so great about being an independent artist, and that you don't have to deal with the label, and you don't have to deal with the A&R person, you don't have to deal with all the pressures that come from that, because those things actually, when they work, and they do work, they actually bring about a better product. There's deadlines.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the deaths of independent artists, is that they theoretically they don't have a deadline, because they don't hold themselves accountable for working, and releasing something, and committing to, hey, I'm putting an EP out on April 15th. April 14th starts rolling along. It's like, well, I think I'm just gonna like put it out in June 25th, and I'm waiting for this, I'm waiting for that, I'm waiting to meet up with this PR person, and I'm trying to set this. I love that whole like, we got to set this up thing. You're an independent artist. I mean, put it out there, put it on the shelf, and see if people start grabbing it. And if they're not grabbing it, I think then you have to try and figure out why they're not grabbing it. That's a difficult thing, but working with them is night and day. I mean, I can't say I have a preference for either one.
Right.
I love working with major label artists because there's something different there. And then I love working with indies because they have a different spirit. There is some of that naivete that's like, you can't get back once a major label artist is in the machine. There's only that first or second or third record where they're like sort of really excited and naive to how difficult it all is, and then by the third record or fourth record, they're looking at what commitments they have, and what publishing commitments they have, and how to meet deadlines, and it's just a crazy different thing.
Yeah, as you touched on there, and not envying independent artists. Independent artists, I think, have to wear about 20 different hats, in the sense that the major music artists have people to do that for them. So for example, the independent artist has to market their music. They have to, reach out to producers, whereas when you are the major artist, you have those connections for you. You have people doing that for you. So have you found that when you do work with independent artists, you almost have to act as a mentor to them as well in other areas?
Well, I mean, it's definitely a major part of those type of sessions, or if I'm producing a new artist, or if I'm just mixing for them. I don't do really any more like straight up recording sessions where I'm not the producer. I don't do recording sessions anymore as if I'm not the producer. I'll do mixing sessions if I'm not the producer, but I don't do recording sessions anymore. But during the like mixing, if someone gives me an EP to mix or something like that, and there is definitely like a mentoring kind of side to that, because they're trying to learn the process of having a mix done. So I would have to try and explain, especially if something's very new, like, what's the difference between how things sounded when they were recording it and now how they're going to sound when they're mixed. How much the recording affects the mix process. I do find that, like, one of the things that self-produced artists and independent artists have difficulty with is that the mix process is a change. And there's an interpretation that's going on behalf of the mixer. So the mixer is going about doing their thing, mixing the record, and usually new artists sometimes have a hard time grasping the idea that it now sounds the way it does. So a lot of times a mix will uncover maybe like artifacts and things that aren't so good. And then they'll point it out, because like if someone's recording a lot while they have a bad sounding mix, reference mix thing, they won't hear all the things that are sort of like off time or maybe out of tune. So then they hand it to someone like me, I start mixing it, and then you start being able to hear all the elements, and they're like, whoa, like that guitar player sounds like he's a little off, and like, why my harmonies aren't exactly, can you tune them? All that kind of stuff starts happening. It's always a learning process, even for major label artists, to go through the writing, the production, or the pre-production, the production, the recording, then to the mixing, then maybe even into the mastering. All those things are a learning process to get used to the idea of that things are going to change. They're not going to be, you have to get used to the fact that, like, there's an end product that's about to happen, and it could be entirely different than where you started 5 or 6 months ago or a month ago on one song or whatever.
Right. And now moving on here a bit, I know in the introduction I mentioned you have over 9,000 recording and mixing sessions, which is that's a truly remarkable accomplishment. And I know that getting you to describe any single one of those would be practically impossible now. But when looking at them all, what have been your biggest takeaways, either in the work itself or the culture needed in the studio or anything else?
Well, I mean, the technology is always changing, and it's been a nonstop changing thing for, and that's never going to change. So I think that technology is the least important part of surviving 9 or 10,000 sessions. I think it's literally understanding that it is an interactive thing, and that you have to get along with people, interact, read the room, see who's a little bit aggressive, who's shy, who's maybe a little wild, a little bit, like there's a lot to get used to, especially, like I said, during those days where I was like a recording engineer maniac, where I was just showing up and just recording everybody in sight. Those were days where you would just meet that person, and they could be a huge star. You'd meet them that afternoon, help them record them doing whatever, laying a beat down, rapping, singing, give them a reference mix, and then by 2 o'clock in the morning they're leaving, and you'll never see them again the rest of your life. So you had to establish this like rapport really quick,
right?
And a trust. And I was mentoring a guy on Sunday who was getting involved in like being a manager and a production A&R kind of guy. And that was one of the things I was talking to him about, was that, like, I don't know if you can teach that. I think you can learn people skills, but like someone can't teach you how to get along with people, or how to be non-judgmental. And I mean, I think there are like, I mean, there's got to be, I don't know where I got some of it from. I mean, I think some of it was like just, it's just how you grow up, uh, and you don't react to people in any quick way. You let them show who they are, you know, and then you figure out like how you can get along with this person, or like how you can relate. I think that's more important. And a lot of guys that I saw fail in the music industry, their big failure was they just couldn't get along with people. They just couldn't connect on
Interesting.
a trust basis, on a I mean, the word vibe is thrown around out there, but it's a vibe thing. It's like, and I would ask people like, why don't you work with so and so anymore? We're like, it's just like,
It's a
just a
vibe
weird,
thing.
just a weird vibe about that guy, you know, or just you know, really nervous, really took forever with the gear thing, and I mean, you're really, especially when you're doing the recording thing, you're really interacting with people, and almost like sort of like becoming a sort of part of how they breathe and act. You know, if someone's really hyper, you better sort of like get up to their speed. If
Right.
someone is super chill, you have to kind of like keep with them, follow their rhythm, and be a little bit of a parasite type of thing. Like, just like, okay, this person really likes me to take my time with recording their vocal, and you know not be like bing 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 bing, like, hey, like, let's try it again, oh, that's terrible. and, and then there's other artists that are like, they're quick, and they're okay with not criticism, but like really being scrutinizing what they do. So you could just tell them right off, yeah, oh yeah, that you missed that note, or hey, you were a little off time there. You can kind of get a feel for whether someone, what they can handle, and if they can handle it. There's some singers, if you tell them they might have been a little flat on that one, it might be over,
Right.
because they might be crying in the bathroom and then coming back out, and all of a sudden they don't feel well, and oh, my allergies are killing me, and the session's over. You're toast.
So next, I kind of have a little bit of a general question here, and you did touch on a bit of it, but as someone who has seen it all and been around it all, what advice would you give to up and coming artists or independent artists nowadays?
My only advice is that, like, I don't know if you really have any understanding of like how hard these people work that have gotten to the point where you want to be. Um, there's always going to be like the little bit of a, oddity that, like, okay, her dad was a record label guy, and so she was born into it, and there was some sort of, a little bit
Mm,
of a break there or whatever. But the majority have not gotten like some weird birthright break. They are very similar to um, your famous athletes, and they all have something in common, like the Michael Jordan, the Tiger Woods, the Peyton Manning, the Tom Brady. What's the one thing you hear about all of them is that, like, they were always practicing and always working on their thing, always at the driving range, always in the gym, all hours of the night, always on the football field throwing footballs thousands of times and watching film and all that stuff. It's very similar to the big artists that I've been around. They literally are just completely tunnel visioned and just in their thing. They are 100% immersed in what they do. And the only time that changes is as their careers move forward, they get distracted by 9 million things, because now they've become a business and they're being pulled in different areas. Like, oh, you gotta like maybe prepare to host an awards show, and you got to make an appearance at this and all that. So like all these things are, you have to do an interview with Rolling Stone. You got to do 18 photo shoots, but all of that stuff especially in the very beginning, most young artists don't put in that kind of time. They waste a lot of time. They waste time doing things that aren't important to like what their goals are, if they really thought about what their goals are. And the artists that I worked with that were young, that went on to become major stars, they were very goal oriented. They definitely had their eyes on a specific prize, whether that was like, I'm going to get to the point where I'm putting out my first record and the major label, and then I'm going to do whatever it takes to like tour. They had goals. They were big goals. I think that's one of the things that I was walking around this morning listening to music, and I was listening to the Eagles and just blown away about how good the stuff is. And I was thinking, I'm like, when these guys were making these records, they weren't trying to like just be the same as like their peers that were putting out records at the time. They're like, how do we be better than the Beatles? Like that was their crazy mentality. It was like, how can we be better than the Beatles? And then there were generations that went along that were like, I want to be better than Led Zeppelin. I want to be better than Van Halen, and I want to be better than Elvis. But I think right now we have a very big tendency to be very copycat oriented. Instead of saying like, you know what, I want to be better than Alicia Keys. Like, I just want to like make people forget her by how good I am. They're like, I want to be Alicia Keys. Alicia Keys wasn't trying to be Lauryn Hill. She was trying to outdo Lauryn Hill, who was her peer at the time, or like Mary J. Blige. I mean, this stuff I can say, freely. I don't care. I know that's how the thought process was with a lot of these artists. They were very competitive with big stuff, not the person sort of just ahead of them or just behind them. It was like, I'm looking to try and be the biggest star. And if you're not trying to be the biggest star, if you don't have those type of aspirations, those type of goals, I mean, there's really not a good chance that you're going to get there. So if you're a little rock band right now and you're trying to be a big deal, you want to be like, I want to be bigger than Coldplay, like, in 2 years.
I think that's so important to set goals, because one thing I've noticed is a lot of independent artists don't really know what they want, but at the same time, they enjoy music. So they work hard, but by working hard, they're doing things that aren't getting them anywhere. For example, they're just sitting at their computer all day, sending their song links out everywhere. So they might be putting in time, but it's just not getting them closer to where they want to be.
Right. And honestly, if you're doing that, if you're just at a computer, like trying to send out links, and are you really doing that 16 hours a day? No. You're doing like 5,000 other distractive things, including like watching videos and scrolling on TikTok and texting with your friend and all that stuff. Like all those things, you're not real. I know that they're not really putting in a full 8-hour day. If they were, if they were to like really write down by the minute, like, okay, for the last 45 minutes, I just literally, without distraction, was like pounding Instagrams and Twitters and things like that, and YouTube, and like, they can't fill up an 8-hour day, because I know that they don't have the attention span, which is, there are a few that do, and then that's why there's only 0.5% make it. If you could tell me at the end of a week that you put in a 100-hour week on your career, then I would say that you're working hard. Because like when I was coming up in the recording studio thing, when I was doing those Michael Jackson sessions, my stubs, and so did Rob's, and so did Andrew Shep's, said 100 hours a week we were working. Wow. It was 7 days a week, 16 hours a day, 42 and 70. One, it was like, I knew all the numbers because I was like, oh, this is how, I'm like making money, finally getting paid some money. I know artists that are like, it's like, hey, if I work 15 hours a day on my career, and someone else is only working 8 hours a day on like their career, every day I'm gaining 7 hours on that person, and then by the end of the week that's 49 hours, and then it's 200 hours by the end of the month, and I'm winning because I am making my way past them.
Very true. You got to put in the work. Hard work don't lie. And switching gears here, but again, I know you have a YouTube channel and you were touching on it a bit, but can you tell me a little bit more about it and the inspiration to start it?
Yeah, so I started a YouTube channel towards the end of January. I had been throwing around the idea in my head of like how I've always had a website, like literally going back to like 1996. I had a website. So I started thinking about doing a YouTube channel. I'm not really 100% sure exactly why I decided that I wanted to do one, but I had a camera that I had been wanting to mess around with for a while. We'd just come through the pandemic and everything. I was like, you know what? I'll start a channel and see like what's involved in doing it, like learning all the process of, recording, editing, uploading, all that kind of thing, all the stuff that like for some godforsaken reason I still have the appetite to do. I'm just into that thing naturally. I'll probably give some insight into developing as an act, as an artist, the recording process. I'll probably swing back and forth a little bit into some technical stuff, but I don't want to be committed to like gear.
And I was actually listening to a video on your YouTube channel, and you were talking about how artists like Prince, Alicia Keys, and Billie Eilish broke through with what you were calling transcendent songs. And in the video, you were saying that a big mistake is creating what everyone else is doing. And even earlier in this podcast, you were saying people are striving to be Alicia Keys rather than surpass her. And just to build off that, what advice would you give to aspiring musicians to try and create transcendent songs, or to be the first them rather than the next Alicia Keys?
That's the secret sauce. I mean, granted, there are artists that get some success by literally like being really quick and being exactly the same as something previous. I wouldn't want to give an example, but if you look at the artists that break through on a just meteoric way, their initial impression that they make upon the public is almost like completely opposite of everything that is going on at the time. So when Alicia broke through, she had these braids and was sitting at the piano singing, which like no R&B singer was doing at the time at that moment. Right. She had like a street swagger to her, which everyone was. We were just coming out of like the very blingy R&B thing with like everybody had to be sort of like dancing and everything with even Mary J and all them. So she was like a complete left turn from what was happening. It wasn't like, oh, she's doing exactly what Mary J just got done doing.
Mm-hmm, right. And
then if I had mentioned like Jay-Z, when Jay-Z broke through with Hard Knock Life, no one had used a sample from a Broadway play as the hook in a rap tune. It was way out there, it was like, you couldn't help. I mean, people's parents knew what that was when it hit, because it was like, what? There's a guy rapping and then the chorus from Annie comes in. It was different. And then like in today's world, like someone, if that came out, like 5 people would try and like show up at the studio with samples from Broadway plays, soundtracks. So like, oh, I'm going to just do the same exact thing. You can get away with like a little bit, but you're not going to become Jay-Z by doing that. You're just going to be, you might get a little breather here and there and you'll get some success, but odds are it's just going to vanish because it'll be like, what? Another one of those? So the transcendent thing to me is that I don't know that you can intentionally try and be transcendent. I think it's just literally, if you want to know why these artists break through, it's because they're that different. They're that they have that it factor. Maybe they're a hybrid of several things, of several artists and influences. And they're also like, they're outliers. They grew up a certain way and they were fans of a certain kind of music, and all of a sudden that kind of collided into this thing. I mean, when the Beastie Boys hit, there was nothing like the Beastie Boys. They used rock samples and no one had done that before. It's that reaching for new, unique stuff that gives someone a chance to go be a superstar. Going back to what we were talking about with goals, like if your goal is not to be a superstar, you're not going to have that kind of nerve to do things that are just outside the norm.
Yeah.
You're playing the safe lane. You know, you're playing it safe. I saw even in Alicia's career, like initially the record label tried to play it safe. Her first single was this tune called Girlfriend, and she was like dancing in it, you know, with like choreography and everything, like probably out there somewhere on YouTube.
Okay.
And it was very middle of the road R&B stuff. And her and her production partner Carey and her A&R guy, from what I understand, maybe a little bit, but particularly Alicia, they wanted Fallen to be the single because it was that different, and they believed in Alicia's sound as opposed to trying to sound like Destiny's Child and Mary J. Blige and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's so important, being different, because what I like to tell artists is when they say, you know, I want to be the next Alicia Keys or whatever, my reply is, why would anyone want to listen to you then when they can listen to Alicia Keys?
They don't. That's why all this legacy stuff sells, and the new stuff is, people are like, why is Spotify doing so well with all the legacy artists and everything? Because of that. I was like, well, why would I listen to that when what they're copying already exists and it's better?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Tony, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, and you're always welcome to come back. In the meantime, though, that is going to conclude this episode. Tony, once again, thank you for sharing all that you did. And for those listening, keep working hard. Let Tony be an inspiration to yourself to continue to put in the hard work and grow as producers, engineers, singers, etc. Until next time, take care and keep making music.